I had befriended a cop back in 2004 in
Mhm.
the wake of or I should say, in the run up to the Republican National Convention in New York City. And this guy was convinced that the city was going to burn to the ground. They had been doing sessions where they were telling them like there was going to be the risk. He
Right.
was like in a frenzied I mean, he was a smart smart guy, and otherwise like a relatively like, I think, calm individual, but they had really riled him up that there was something really horrible about to go down.
Yeah.
And that you found that experience just in general, it seems like.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that what struck me about being at the police academy was both what was taught and what was taught officially, what was taught unofficially, and what was never mentioned. And the bulk of what was taught sort of officially, part of the official curriculum, the classroom instruction, was tactical and operational. It was memorize the list of property forms and what color pen you need to use to fill them out. Memorize the appropriate procedure for handcuffing a standing prisoner versus a prone prisoner versus a kneeling prisoner, memorize a list of vehicular offenses. That's what we learned. You have lots of stuff to memorize, lots of tactics. What we didn't talk about was any of the issues the entire rest of the country was talking about: race and policing, violence and policing. What is policing for? What should the role of policing be in a democratic, diverse society? We didn't talk about any of that, which was a really noticeable omission. And it's not because recruits didn't want to talk about it. I think there was, in fact, kind of a hunger to be talking about what the rest of the country was talking about, but we didn't. The unofficial lesson of the police academy is what you were talking about earlier, Sam. We really had sort of instilled in us a sense that anybody could kill you at any moment. And we would hear over and over, there's no such thing as a routine call. Any situation could turn lethal in a millisecond. You always have to be prepared to face a lethal threat. Nobody, no matter how innocent looking, you can never let your guard down. Don't interview suspects in the kitchen because they could grab a butcher knife and stab you to death. Don't interview suspects in their living room sitting on the sofa because they could have a concealed weapon between the sofa cushions that they could pull out and shoot you. And we were constantly watching these videos of cops getting killed, cops doing a traffic stop, walking up to the car, somebody pops out with an automatic weapon, dead cop. Cops walk up to a domestic violence call, guy opens the door, shoots them dead. And we would talk about these and analyze these for, what could the police officers here have done differently? Could they have approached differently, and so on? But as you can probably imagine, the result of all of this was really, I think, to instill young officers with a sense of being under constant threat from every possible source, no matter how seemingly innocuous it might be. And that, needless to say, well, I mean, I think it's worth saying, police do get killed. It happens. Shortly before I started the police academy, there was a young woman in a neighboring jurisdiction on her very first day out of the police academy, did go to a domestic violence call with a couple of other officers. Guy did pop out the door with a gun, shot and killed her, left two other officers seriously injured. That can happen. But it happens a whole lot less than police officers think it happens. Statistically speaking, it's not very common. And yet, if you have these officers who go out into the world primed to view every single interaction as one that could lead to their death, that's clearly going to have a pretty big impact on how they interact with people.
I think at one point you suggested that the cops that you were with thought, when you asked them how often police officers are killed, that they were like 10 to 20 times off.
Yeah. And, this is a human problem. It's not a cop problem, right?
Right.
This is like, you ask people how often people are killed by terrorists or how often children are abducted by random pedophiles at the playground, and they'll give you statistics that are ridiculously out of proportion to the actual threat. So in this sense, it's a human tendency to, you find out about one terrible incident like the one I mentioned where the young woman is shot and killed on her first day on patrol. And it's so shocking, you tend to think this must happen all the time, even though statistically it doesn't. And yeah, it's one of my favorite questions to ask cops. How many police officers do you think are killed on duty every year, killed as opposed to die in a car crash or have a heart attack? And they tend to say, 500, 1,000, 300, 800, 10,000. It's more like typically about 50, 60 people a year, which is terrible, but a whole lot fewer cops die because someone kills them than cops think.
What really struck me about that was not that people overestimated that the cops overestimated the threat to them in terms of dying, because I think we're going through that with COVID on some
Yeah.
level. It's
Yep.
like the
Yep.
people, it's very difficult. But you would think for people whose profession is so
Yeah.
oriented towards that, that
Yeah.
would be like day one. Everybody, there would be some, salty old cop teaching, at the academy, going like, "Look, here's the fact: 50 people out of the 800,000 sworn law officers
Yeah.
this year probably are going to be killed in the line of duty." I mean, you would think that would be.
Mhm.
Is there? I mean, was it your sense that maybe that it was that how conscious was the police academy aware of, like, that's not a bad myth for us to have in terms of what we want to motivate these trainees with?
It's interesting. I mean, I think that cops cling to that myth because nobody, it feels more glamorous and exciting to be in an occupation where you're constantly taking risks. um, and so I think there's a self-serving element to that myth of hey, don't you dare question what I do because I'm the one who runs towards gunfire. You can't possibly understand what it's like. But I also think, when you, certainly at the DC Police Academy, which I should say has changed in some significant ways since then. When you talk to the leadership there, they sort of say, yeah, we need to be letting people know that, yes, they need to be alert and situationally aware, but we also need to be letting them know that, that's very rare that they're going to face a lethal threat. And that if they go into every situation acting like everybody's a threat, I mean, what happens is obvious, right? At the extreme end, you get trigger happy cops who do what that cop who stopped Philando Castile outside of Minneapolis did a few years back. Castile said, I have a legal registered firearm. I will show you the paperwork. He reached and the cop panicked and shot him. And if you're primed to think everybody's going to kill you, well, then every time anybody reaches into a pocket or a glove compartment or a bag, there's a danger that you shoot first and ask questions later. I think, though, the in some ways, the invisible harm of that, though, the harm that never makes headlines because it's doesn't find its way into police reports or anything else, is just the degree to which that mindset leads police officers, to do more stops, more frisks. It affects who they stop and frisk. It affects their tone of voice when they're talking to people in ordinary interactions. And one of the scenes I describe in the book is going to a domestic violence call with a partner, a male partner, and a young woman, 16, 17-year-old girl, she's in her own living room. She reached into her own bag to show my partner that she was the person who'd called 911. And he freaked out. He grabbed her arm and he shouted at her, put your hands where I can see them. And, she was like, officer, what is the problem? I'm cooperating. And it was fine. There's no report, no harm, no foul in some level, but the invisible harm is, boy, that girl's not going to call 911 anymore,
Right.
Because she got scared out of her mind by a cop who was jumpy. And that, the fear, the humiliation that people experience when you have a jumpy, scared cop who screams at them, that is hard to quantify, but it's obviously, an enormous negative impact.
Folks, there's more of what you've just saw where that came from. That's if you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you. Really, thank you.